Clara Whitcombe had 48 hours to confess to a theft she had not committed. Mr. Alistair Vane placed the confession before her with the same courtesy he used when presenting annual accounts to the trustees of Hartwell Estate. The paper lay centered on his walnut desk, beside a silver pen and a glass of water no one had offered her. £146 is missing, he said. The altered entries bear your initials. They imitate my initials. Vane folded his hands across his waistcoat. At 45, he had built a reputation as a patient estate steward who remembered tenants' children and contributed generously to the parish coal fund. That morning, he had dismissed the junior clerks so Clara's disgrace could remain, as he called it, private. "The constable will not trouble you if you sign," he said. "You will surrender any claim to unpaid wages and leave Hartwell before Thursday evening. I am prepared to describe your departure as voluntary. And if I refuse, the trustees will prosecute." Clara read the confession without touching it. The false entries had been inserted into 3 quarterly summaries, each shifting small sums from tenant repairs into a dormant drainage account. They had been chosen carefully, large enough to destroy her, but not large enough to invite an inquiry beyond the ledgers Vane controlled. For 7 years, Clara had kept Hartwell's rents, wages, seed purchases, timber sales, and household expenditures accurate to the farthing. She could detect a transposed figure at a glance, but she had never learned how to make powerful men value accuracy when a useful lie served them better. Her father had taught her double-entry bookkeeping at their kitchen table. Thomas Whitcombe, a railway goods clerk with weak lungs and precise hands, had used dried beans for coins before trusting her with real invoices. "Every sum must have a road into the book and a road out," he would say. "If one road disappears, find who closed it." After his death, Clara had kept his brass ruler, his bone-handled penknife, and the small magnifying lens he used to inspect overwritten figures. They rested now inside the satchel at her feet, along with her private daybook. That book contained weekly totals copied in her own hand, but not the individual vouchers needed to prove when the false entries had appeared. "May I examine the original receipts?" she asked. "They are estate property. So are the accounts you accuse me of altering." Vane's expression did not change. "You have until noon on Thursday." Clara rose, leaving the silver pen untouched. Outside the office, rain darkened the gravel yard. The room she rented belonged to Hartwell Estate, as did the coal in its grate, and nearly every person who might have spoken for her. By nightfall, her dismissal would be known in the village. By morning, it would acquire details no one had witnessed. She had saved £11 and 8 shillings. Without a reference, it might last 2 months. A solicitor could consume it in 2 meetings. When Clara reached her room, a thin man in a rain-spotted coat was waiting beneath the eaves. He introduced himself as Mr. Pembroke, solicitor to the late Margaret Bell. Clara knew the name only from her mother's rare stories. Margaret had been her mother's much older half-sister, a woman who had quarreled with the family and kept a coaching inn somewhere west of Shrewsbury. "I regret that Mrs. Bell died 3 weeks ago," Pembroke said. "You are her sole beneficiary." For one reckless moment, Clara imagined enough money to hire counsel and force open Hartwell's records. Then the solicitor unfolded a survey and placed one finger upon a narrow roadside property marked in fading ink. The Bellweather Inn was hers, together with its stable yard and 4 acres of rough pasture. It was also bankrupt. Pembroke explained that the railway had taken most of the coaching trade 12 years earlier. The north roof leaked, the stable required bracing, and £28 in mortgage interest and parish rates would fall due before Michaelmas. The furniture might cover half that amount if sold quickly. "Mrs. Bell attempted to sell twice," he said. "Both buyers withdrew after inspection. Why leave it to me? She wrote only that you would know what ought to be counted." Pembroke handed her a small iron key. the deed, and a sealed inventory, prepared after Margaret's death. The inn was not a rescue. It was another debt wearing the shape of shelter. That evening, Clara compared her choices, as she had once compared columns for her father. A confession would preserve her freedom, but certify Vane's lie. Prosecution might clear her, though only if she could obtain evidence before her savings vanished. The Bellweather could be sold for salvage, perhaps, but accepting it made her liable for what was owed. At 11, someone pushed an envelope beneath her door. Inside was a railway ticket to Liverpool and £5 in banknotes. There was no signature. Across the ticket, in Vane's narrow hand, someone had written, "Thursday. Do not make this difficult." Clara studied the notes through her father's magnifying lens. Their serial numbers ran consecutively. A payment, if she accepted it. Evidence of flight, if she did not. She wrapped the money and ticket in the unsigned confession, sealed all three inside an envelope, and addressed it to Pembroke, with instructions that it remain unopened unless she was arrested. Then she packed her tools, clothing, private daybook, and the Bellweather deed. At 9 the next morning, Clara entered Vane's office and placed the silver pen across the blank signature line. "I will not confess. You will have nowhere to go." Clara closed her hand around Margaret Bell's iron key. "Yes," she said. "I do." She left Hartwell before noon, bound for the Bankrupt Inn no sensible person wanted, and carrying the first piece of evidence that Alistair Vane feared what she might find. The branch train carried Clara west, beneath a sky the color of unpolished pewter. She spent the journey studying Margaret Bell's inventory, while damp fields passed beyond the glass. The document listed 11 guest rooms, a public parlor, a dining room, 2 kitchens, a tap room, stables, and several outbuildings. Most furnishings were described as worn, damaged, or unsuitable for sale. A valuation of £19 had been crossed out and replaced with 14. Clara turned the final page toward the window. The alteration resembled honest correction, but the handwriting below it troubled her. Certain papers retained pending examination. There was no signature and no explanation of who had retained them. She changed trains at Shrewsbury and reached Merredon shortly before dusk. The village station consisted of a brick platform, a freight shed, and a ticket office scarcely larger than Hartwell's pantry. A porter directed her to the Bellweather, but would not meet her eyes after learning she owned it. "You'll want Mr. Gorse's cart," he said. 2 miles, if the lower road isn't flooded." "Why would it be?" "The Bellweather drain backs onto it." Mr. Gorse, the carrier, charged Clara 2 shillings to take her trunk, and agreed to let her ride beside him. He was a square-shouldered man with a beard gone gray around the mouth. When she asked about Margaret, he flicked the reins. Kept to herself at the end. Was she ill? Old. That is not an illness. He glanced at Clara, apparently deciding she resembled her aunt enough to be inconvenient. She trusted ledgers more than neighbors, he said. No offense intended. None taken. The railway road climbed away from the village, before turning toward a stone bridge. Beyond it stood the Bellweather Inn. Its central building was 3 stories high, built of dark red brick beneath a sagging slate roof. One chimney leaned toward the road. Ivy covered half the western wall, and rainwater spilled from a broken gutter above the entrance. The coaching arch remained broad enough for a mail coach, but nettles filled the yard behind it. A faded bell hung beneath the eaves, motionless despite the wind. Someone had painted "unsound" across the stable doors. Gorse set Clara's trunk beneath the arch. "You're not staying here tonight?" "I own it. That wasn't my question." He accepted his payment, then advised her to seek a room at the Crown before darkness. When Clara asked whether the Crown's proprietor might extend credit, his expression answered before he did. "Mr. Pritchard has opinions about this place." "And about my aunt?" "About debt." The cart departed, leaving Clara with £9, 18 shillings and 6pence, a condemned stable, and a building that smelled of wet plaster before she opened the door. The iron key turned reluctantly. Inside, the entrance hall was colder than the road. Wallpaper curled from the walls in long strips, and a brown stain spread across the ceiling. Clara tested each floorboard with the heel of her boot before placing her weight upon it. The public parlor was dry. Its grate contained a nest made from straw and scraps of newspaper. The kitchen pump produced rusty water, but the yard pump ran clear after 15 strokes. One lower chimney drew properly once she removed a dead jackdaw from the flue. Those discoveries established her first priorities: water, heat, and one room safe enough to sleep in. Pride could wait. She carried her trunk into the tap room, whose shutters still fastened, then dragged a horsehair mattress downstairs, from a rear bedroom untouched by the roof leak. By the time she had swept the hearth and boiled water, night had covered the windows. A knock sounded at the front door. The man outside was stout, clean-shaven, and dressed in a coat too fine for farm work. He introduced himself as Josiah Pritchard, proprietor of the Crown and chairman of the parish rating committee. "I understand you mean to reopen," he said. "I arrived 2 hours ago." Rumors travel faster than trains. Pritchard handed her a notice, confirming the arrears due before Michaelmas. He then offered £8 for the Bellwether's remaining furniture and fittings, provided she vacated within a week. "The place has failed twice," he said. "Your aunt would not accept cents." Clara looked past him toward the road. "Did you make her the same offer?" "Several." "Then you already know my answer." His smile narrowed. Merrodin has little use for another stubborn woman with a book. After he left, Clara barred the door and entered his offer in her daybook. She noted the date, hour, amount, and his exact description of the property. Men often became careless when they believed a woman kept records merely from habit. The promised papers were not in Margaret's bedroom or the kitchen dresser. Clara found them after midnight inside a locked desk in the former office. Her father's penknife released the warped drawer without damaging it. There were trade bills, tax notices, and 4 cloth-bound account books. The newest ended 6 months before Margaret's death. Clara carried it to the hearth and began checking its totals. Room charges appeared rarely after the railway opened. One entry recorded a commercial traveler in room 3. Another listed a married couple in rooms 8 and 9. Then, on the first Monday of every quarter, the same line appeared. Room 12. Maintenance received. £2 10 shillings. Clara turned back through the ledger. The payment recurred for 27 years. She took Margaret's inventory from her satchel. 11 guest rooms. Clara lifted the lamp and looked toward the black staircase. Somewhere above her, rain tapped across a roof covering a chamber the inn's official inventory insisted did not exist. Clara did not climb the staircase. An unknown room could wait until daylight. A rotten tread could not. She slept badly beside the taproom hearth, waking whenever wind moved through the coaching arch or rain struck the loose gutter. At 6, she rose, counted her remaining coal, and opened the account books again. The quarterly payment for room 12 had never increased. £2 10 shillings appeared in March, June, September, and December, regardless of occupancy, repairs, or changing prices. It was not rent. Rent would have risen at least once in 27 years. More curious still, Margaret had recorded every payment as received in cash, yet her annual totals excluded it from ordinary income. Clara copied the entries into her daybook. She refused to build a theory before she possessed facts. Her father had compared premature conclusions to adding a column before all its figures were entered. By 8, she had inspected the ground floor. The public parlor required plaster and new wallpaper, but remained structurally sound. The dining room smelled of fungus. The tap room was dry except beneath one window, and its chimney drew well. Restoring that room would give her a secure place to sleep, work, and receive anyone willing to do business with her. She wrote 3 headings on a sheet of paper: necessary, profitable, and can wait. Under the first, she placed chimney sweeping, 2 sound locks, roof tarpaulins, lamp oil, and food. Under the second went the taproom window and salvage from the stable. Nearly everything else belonged in the third column. At 9, a young woman appeared in the yard carrying a wooden tool chest. She had wind-reddened cheeks, a patched brown dress, and wood shavings clinging to one sleeve. She introduced herself as Ruth Mercer, daughter of the village joiner. "Mr. Pritchard says you're selling the fittings," Ruth said. "Mr. Pritchard says many things. He offered my father the paneling. Did your father send you to remove it?" Ruth's chin lifted. "He sent me to see whether the window frames were worth buying." Clara showed her the taproom. Ruth tested the wood with a small awl, pressing around each joint rather than judging by appearance. 3 frames were rotten at the sill. The 4th needed only a new lower rail. "You know your work," Clara said. "I know enough to be sent where customers might refuse to pay." Clara understood the warning. She placed 6 pence on the windowsill for examining all 4. "Another shilling if you repair the best one using timber we can safely salvage." Ruth stared at the coin. "Women here usually bargain after the work. I bargain before it. And if it takes longer than you expect, then we discuss why. Time is not a crime." Ruth accepted. While she worked, Clara entered the stable. The painted warning had been justified. One roof beam had split, and the eastern wall leaned outward. Yet several stall partitions remained dry and straight. Clara marked each soundboard with chalk before allowing Ruth to remove anything. By noon, they had enough oak to mend the window and build a brace for the taproom door. Ruth's father arrived shortly after, anger preceding him across the yard. Silas Mercer was a narrow man with a carpenter's square protruding from his coat pocket. He demanded to know why Clara had employed his daughter without consulting him. "She offered a price," Ruth said. "I accepted." Mercer examined the repaired frame. His anger weakened, though it did not disappear. "What did she charge you?" 18 pence. "That work is worth 2 shillings. Clara added 6 pence to Ruth's payment. Ruth looked from the coins to her father. Something unspoken passed between them. Mercer inspected the cracked stable beam without being asked. He warned Clara that the roof would fall during the first heavy wind unless it was shored. New timber would cost more than she possessed, but he showed her where temporary supports could be placed. "I have no money for charity," Clara said. "Wasn't offering it. Ruth says you keep honest accounts." It was not friendship, but it was the first judgment in Merredin that did not come from rumor. By late afternoon, the repaired window shut tightly. Clara washed the taproom walls, arranged 2 surviving tables near the fire, and moved Margaret's desk beneath the window. The room remained scarred and nearly empty, yet it had become usable. She entered every expense in her daybook: 6 pence for inspection, 2 shillings for labor, 4 pence for nails, and 3 pence for bread and dripping shared at noon. At that rate, she could secure the ground floor and survive 4 weeks. The roof would require another plan. Before leaving, Ruth noticed the account book beside Clara's ruler. "Looking for the missing room?" Clara's hand stilled. "Who told you?" "No one. Mrs. Bell used to ask Father whether a room could be built without a door. He thought she was losing her senses." "Did she say where it was?" "Only that the inn had been made to lie about its own size." After Ruth departed, Clara carried a spool of cord upstairs. She measured the passage in 1-foot lengths, using her brass ruler, knotting the cord at each turn. 11 doors opened from the corridor, matching the inventory. Then she went outside and measured the building's eastern wall by pacing beside it and correcting each stride against the ruler. Even allowing for brickwork, chimney breasts, and interior partitions, the exterior was nearly 9 feet longer than the rooms within. Clara returned upstairs as the light faded. At the corridor's end stood a linen press fixed against the wall. Its shelves were shallow, although the cabinet appeared unusually deep. She removed the folded sheets and found iron screws beneath the lowest shelf. Each screw head bore bright scratches. Someone had opened the cabinet since Margaret Bell died. Clara touched the scratched metal with one fingertip. The marks were too clean to have survived years of dust. Whoever had loosened the screws had either failed to remove the linen press or replaced it afterward. She did not attempt the work alone. Ruth returned the following morning with her father, 2 pry bars, and an expression of unconcealed curiosity. Clara paid Silas Mercer 3 shillings to inspect the staircase, shift the cabinet, and help erect temporary supports in the stable. It was more than she wished to spend, but less than a broken leg or collapsed roof would cost. The linen press had been constructed in place. Once its shelves were removed, Ruth discovered hinges along the left side, concealed beneath several coats of paint. "It isn't furniture," she said. "It's a door, pretending to be furniture." The hinges moved only after Silas applied oil, but the cabinet opened no more than an inch. Something solid held it from behind. Through the narrow gap came a draft, carrying the odor of cold brick and old soot. Clara held a lamp near the opening. "There's space beyond it." "Not enough to call a room," Silas said. "Could be a sealed flue." Ruth crouched beside the lower hinge. "This one is backward." The hinge pins had been fitted from inside the hidden space. The cabinet was intended to open inward, but someone had later driven wedges behind it, fixing it shut. Silas would not force the structure without knowing what supported the wall. He agreed to examine it from below once the taproom ceiling was safe. Clara accepted his caution. The Bellweather had stood for nearly a century. Impatience could destroy in minutes what neglect had merely concealed. They spent the remainder of the morning bracing the stable. 2 sound stall posts became temporary shores beneath the cracked beam, while Ruth covered the worst opening in the roof with an old canvas carriage sheet treated with linseed oil. The work would not survive winter, but it might withstand the next storm. By noon, Clara's available money had fallen below £9. She recorded each nail, length of rope, and hour of labor. Silas watched her total the column. "Your aunt counted everything too," he said. "Did she ever explain room 12? She asked whether I could open that press without damaging it. 3 months ago, I told her I'd need another pair of hands. When I returned, she said the matter was settled. Did you see anyone else here?" Pritchard's clerk came often near the end, claimed he was discussing her debts. That afternoon, Clara searched Margaret's office for corresponding entries. The room 12 payments appeared in the income ledger, but not in the cash book. Instead, on every quarterly date, Margaret had reduced an account labeled BW Maintenance by the same amount. Money had not entered the inn at all. Someone had used the fiction of room 12 to cancel a continuing obligation. Clara found the earliest entry in 1846. The ink had browned, but beside it, Margaret had written 3 tiny figures, 7 to 312. They were not pounds, shillings, and pence. 12 pence could not remain 12 without becoming a shilling. Nor did they match a date. Clara copied them carefully. A horse stopped in the yard before she could search further. Pritchard entered without knocking. He carried a sealed letter bearing the Hartwell estate crest. "I have been advised that you left your former position under suspicion," he said. "Advised by whom?" "The estate steward appears concerned that Meriden should understand your character. Then Mr. Vane has shown remarkable speed." Pritchard placed the letter on Margaret's desk, but kept 2 fingers upon it. "Your aunt's creditors may object to their property being administered by a suspected embezzler. The Bellweather is my property. Until Michaelmas." He offered £35 for the freehold, subject to its debts. The sum would clear the immediate arrears and leave Clara with almost nothing, but it was more than the inn's fittings were worth. Pritchard expected her to know that. "Why do you want a failed inn?" she asked. I own the crown. Removing competition has value. The Bellweather has no customers. Then you lose nothing by selling. Clara looked at the Hartwell seal. May I read the letter? It was addressed to me. Then please record in writing that your offer followed a private accusation from the man controlling the evidence against me. Pritchard's fingers tightened. He withdrew both letter and offer. By evening, the village grocer had refused Clara credit, and the coal merchant demanded payment in advance. Vane's first blow had reached Marrowden. Clara returned to the account books. If 7312 was neither money nor a date, it might identify a place. She laid Margaret's inventory beside the old fire insurance plan and numbered the ground floor windows, stair turns, and chimney flues. 7 steps from the upstairs landing brought her to the third wall panel opposite the supposed room 12. The 12th floorboard sounded hollow. Clara knelt and examined it beneath the lamp. Unlike the neighboring boards, it had been secured with narrow brass screws rather than nails. Inside one screw head remained a thread of dark blue sealing wax. The same blue wax marked the Hartwell estate letter Pritchard had refused to let her read. Clara did not mistake resemblance for proof. Blue sealing wax could be purchased in any stationer's shop, and the fragment beneath the screw might have remained there for years. Still, Vane's letter and the floorboard shared more than color. Both bore a faint silver streak, where powdered mica had been mixed into the wax. She had seen that mixture every week at Hartwell. At first light, she sent a note to Ruth, asking her to bring Silas and a narrow screwdriver. Clara would not disturb concealed machinery without witnesses. Silas arrived displeased by the request, but interested enough to kneel beside the 12th board. The brass screws resisted until he warmed them with the tip of a poker. Beneath the board lay a shallow channel containing an iron rod, blackened with grease, and connected to a lever hidden under the skirting. This runs toward the linen press, Ruth said. The mechanism was simple once exposed. Raising the lever withdrew 2 iron wedges from behind the cabinet. Whoever had opened the floor had known how the false door worked. Whoever had scratched its visible screws had not. Silas inspected the ceiling below, then placed temporary boards across the weakest section of corridor. Ruth pulled the lever while Clara pressed against the linen press. The entire cabinet swung inward with a long wooden groan. Cold air passed over them. The concealed chamber measured roughly 9 feet by 7, accounting for the discrepancy between the exterior and interior walls. It had no ordinary window. Light entered through a narrow opening, concealed behind the inn's eastern signboard, while a disused chimney flue provided ventilation. A desk stood against one wall. 6 numbered pigeonholes had been built above it. 5 were empty. The 6th contained a tin dispatch box. Ruth stepped forward, but Clara caught her sleeve. Look at the dust. Most of the floor held an even gray covering. Near the pigeonholes, boot marks overlapped one another. One set was narrow and worn at the heel, possibly Margaret's. The others were broader and sharply edged. Someone had entered within the last few months. Silas examined the chamber for damage before allowing them farther inside. The roof above it remained sound because an additional slope diverted water toward the eastern gutter. From the yard, that construction would appear to be part of the old coaching arch. No builder added this after the inn was finished, he said. The beams were cut to accommodate it. Then room 12 was planned from the beginning, Clara replied. The dispatch box was locked. Its brass plate carried no name, only the letters BW. The key Margaret had left Clara did not fit. Ruth searched the desk while Clara examined the pigeonholes. Each had once held something rectangular. The dust preserved clean outlines where 5 boxes had been removed. The remaining tin box had been pushed so far back that a hurried search might have missed it. Inside the desk lay a dry ink bottle, sealing wax residue, and a thick sheet of blotting paper. Clara held the blotter at an angle to the light. Impressions remained where letters had been written upon sheets above it, but most overlapped. Her magnifying lens revealed scattered words in reverse. Quarter. Custodians. 6 shares. Hartwell. The final visible line had been pressed much harder than the rest. Never convert the maintenance account into ordinary income. Clara's pulse quickened. That was precisely what Margaret's ledgers appeared to do, though only because the corresponding account had been hidden. She laid a clean page over the blotter and lightly shaded it with graphite. More letters emerged, but not enough to reconstruct the message. One phrase appeared twice. Bellweather Trust. B.W., Ruth said, glancing toward the box. Possibly. Clara refused to say more. A phrase was not a legal instrument, and an unexplained box was not an inheritance. Silas produced a small set of picks, used for stubborn cabinet locks. Clara stopped him before he inserted one. If someone removed the other boxes, this may be the only untouched evidence left. We document it first. She drew the room's dimensions, recorded the position of every object, and asked both Mercers to sign beneath her notes. Then Ruth sketched the boot prints, while Silas measured the sole marks. Only after that did he open the lock. The box contained no money. Inside lay a brass tally bearing the number 6, a strip of blue ribbon, and half of a folded account sheet. Its surviving column listed payments to 6 people, identified only by initials. Each received £2 10 shillings per quarter, the amount attributed to room 12. At the bottom, in older ink, someone had written, "Should one house fail, the others will sustain it. No steward may possess more than one key." The opposite half of the sheet had been torn away. So had the names corresponding to the initials. Clara turned the brass tally over. 6 shallow notches marked its edge, but one had been deliberately filed deeper than the others. Within that cut, protected from wear, remained another trace of blue and silver wax. A sound came from the yard. They reached the window opening, in time to see a boy running toward the village. He had been standing beneath the signboard, close enough to hear voices through the concealed vent. Before disappearing around the bend, he looked back. Pinned to his cap was the green ribbon worn by servants at the Crown. Clara recognized the boy that afternoon when he returned alone. He stood beyond the coaching arch, twisting his cap between reddened hands. His name was Daniel Hobb, he said, and he worked in the Crown's kitchen for meals and 3 pence a week. "Mr. Pritchard told me to listen beneath the sign," he admitted. "He said Mrs. Bell hid silver in the walls." There was no silver. Daniel looked relieved rather than disappointed. "He'll ask what you saw," Clara said. "I already told him about the box." Before Clara could question him further, thunder rolled over the hills. Daniel flinched. "Go home before the rain." Ma'am's cottage is by the lower road. The first drops struck the yard with enough force to raise dust. Within minutes, water poured from the Bellwether's broken gutters and ran beneath the stable doors. Clara sent Daniel toward the village and moved the tin dispatch box into her locked trunk. Ruth helped close the secret chamber, while Silas inspected the temporary roof supports. "The eastern ditch should carry this away," he said. "It isn't." Water was already spreading across the pasture behind the inn. Clara opened Margaret's maintenance ledger and searched for drainage expenses. Annual entries recorded payment for clearing the Bellweather culvert until 4 years earlier, when Pritchard's rating committee had transferred responsibility to the parish. No parish work appeared afterward. The old insurance plan showed the culvert passing beneath the lower road before joining the mill stream. If it remained blocked, water would collect behind the raised railway embankment. The Hobb cottage and 2 neighboring houses stood in that hollow. Clara, Ruth, and Silas followed the ditch through driving rain. 50 yards from the road, they found the obstruction: branches, silt, and household rubbish packed against a narrow stone mouth. Silas thrust a spade into the debris. It must be cleared from the stream side. The flooded road prevented them from reaching it. Water climbed over Clara's boots. "There is another channel," she said, remembering a recurring charge in Margaret's oldest accounts. An overflow toward the stable meadow. Silas stared at her. Opening it will send the water through your yard. Will it reach the inn? Not if the coaching arch remains clear. But you'll lose the stored timber, perhaps the stable wall. The sound of rushing water deepened. Across the lower road, Daniel and his mother were carrying blankets from their cottage, while muddy water entered the garden. Clara looked back at the Bellweather. The salvaged boards represented winter fuel, repairs, and several pounds she did not possess. The temporary shores in the stable could not withstand a strong current. Where do we cut? Silas led them to an earthen ridge beside the pasture. Ruth fetched picks, while Clara warned the families below. Pritchard arrived beneath a broad oilskin cape and ordered them to stop. That bank protects the Bellweather boundary, he said. That culvert was neglected after your committee assumed responsibility. You have no authority to alter the drainage. Clara handed her lamp to Daniel's mother and took Ruth's spade. Then record that I acted alone. She drove the blade into the ridge. Silas joined her. After a dozen cuts, the bank gave way. Brown water surged through the opening, crossing the meadow and bursting into the stable yard. Stall boards spun beneath the surface. The carriage sheet tore free from the roof, and one temporary shore shifted with a cracking sound. But the water below the road began to fall. For 2 hours, they kept the coaching arch clear. By dusk, the Hob cottage stood in 6 inches of water rather than 3 feet. The Bellweather's eastern stable wall had partially collapsed. Daniel's mother, Mary Hob, brought Clara a blanket and hot tea. She had no money to offer. Instead, she described seeing Margaret Bell meet strangers at the inn every quarter. 6 of them at first, Mary said, always after dark. She husband called them the Blue Ribbon people. Did you know their names? No, but one came in a Hartwell carriage. Pritchard had remained long enough to witness the stable fall. He returned the next morning, carrying a leather document case. Behind him walked a clerk from Shrewsbury and the village constable. Pritchard placed 2 notices on Margaret's desk. The first stated that he had purchased the Bellweather mortgage from its former holder. The second demanded immediate inspection of the property to assess damage to his security. You arranged that quickly, Clara said. I began before you arrived. The admission escaped him, before his smile could conceal it. Clara glanced at the clerk's boots. They were broad, with sharply edged heels, like those impressed in the dust of room 12. Pritchard followed her gaze. If the property has deteriorated, he continued, I may seek possession before Michaelmas. Any concealed valuables will of course be included in the assessment. The constable stepped forward. And there is another matter, Miss Whitcombe. Mr. Vane has sworn a formal complaint regarding the Hartwell funds. Clara now faced a choice Pritchard had designed carefully. Remain and protect the Bellweather, or return to Hartwell to defend her freedom. Clara asked the constable to state precisely what authority he carried. A summons, not a warrant, he admitted. You are to appear before the county magistrates on Monday. Then neither you nor Mr. Pritchard has authority to search my belongings. Pritchard's clerk opened his document case. Clara recognized him as Edwin Shaw, the man who had prepared Margaret's disputed inventory. His broad boots were freshly polished, but the right heel was worn along its outer edge. Shaw claimed the mortgage entitled its holder to inspect structural damage. Clara permitted him to examine the stable, roof, and exterior walls, while Ruth and Silas remained beside him. She refused access to Margaret's office, the taproom, or the upper floor until a solicitor reviewed the deed. As Shaw crossed the flooded yard, Clara noticed him glance directly toward the signboard, concealing room 12's vent. The boy had told Pritchard more than he admitted. Clara sent Daniel to the station with a telegram for Pembroke. While waiting, she removed the brass tally from the dispatch box and wrapped it in her handkerchief. She wanted to compare its filed notch with the marks in Margaret's oldest accounts. After the storm, however, there was no time for study. The stable roof had shifted 6 inches. Silas ordered everyone away from the eastern wall, then began recovering tools and sound timber from the opposite side. Clara worked beside Ruth until darkness, salvaging what the water had not carried off. Pembroke's reply arrived after supper. He could reach Merredin the following afternoon. Until then, Clara was to sign nothing and admit no creditor without a witness. She locked the tin box, Margaret's newest ledger, and her private Hartwell daybook inside her trunk. The tally remained in her skirt pocket, forgotten beneath the damp handkerchief. Exhaustion overcame caution. Clara fell asleep before the taproom fire had burned low. A splintering crack woke her. Cold air moved across her face. The repaired window stood open, its new lower rail pried neatly from the frame. Clara seized the lamp and reached the staircase as a door struck the wall above. Someone was inside room 12. She climbed, but a shadow rushed from behind the linen press. The intruder drove one shoulder into her, knocking the lamp from her hand. Darkness swallowed the corridor. Clara caught a sleeve and smelled wet wool, lamp oil, and the sharp cologne Pritchard's clerk had worn that morning. The man twisted free. A metal box struck the banister. Clara followed him down the stairs and into the yard. Mud sucked at her boots. Beyond the arch, a horse waited beneath the trees. The rider mounted before she came within 20 feet and vanished toward the village. Ruth and Silas arrived minutes later, awakened by Clara's shouts from the room they had taken at Mary Hobbs' cottage. The trunk had been forced open. The dispatch box was gone. So were Margaret's newest ledger and Clara's private daybook, the only record containing her weekly Hartwell totals before the false entries appeared. In room 12, the remaining papers had been scattered, the blotting sheet torn apart, and the 6 pigeonholes ripped from the wall. The thief had not merely sought valuables, he had known which records mattered. Silas found a brass button beside the linen press. It bore no crest, but dark green thread remained attached. Pritchard's servants wore green. That proves nothing, Clara said. It proves someone in green lost a button. And Pritchard employs half a dozen men. Vane could purchase the same thread. We need more. Ruth stared at the ruined chamber. You still have our signed notes. They were in my daybook. Clara's voice remained steady until she spoke the final word. 7 years of copied totals were gone. Without them, Vane could present the altered Hartwell accounts as originals. Her most credible defense now depended upon records controlled by the man accusing her. At dawn, Pritchard nailed a notice to the coaching arch. The Bellwether's damaged stable, he declared, constituted waste of mortgaged property. Unless the full debt and added inspection costs were paid within 10 days, he would petition for possession and auction the contents. His demand now totaled £34, 6 shillings. Clara possessed less than 9. By midday, villagers had gathered to read the notice. Some had watched Clara save the lower cottages, but few challenged the man who controlled local credit. Mary Hobb brought bread. Ruth stood beside Clara. Everyone else kept a careful distance. Clara entered the taproom and emptied her wet pockets before the fire. Her handkerchief fell open. The brass tally rolled across the table. Rain had washed grime from its surface. Beneath the number 6 appeared a tiny stamped emblem Clara had not noticed before. A bell enclosed by 6 linked circles. She had seen the same design once that morning, not in Margaret's papers, but pressed into the red wax, sealing Pembroke's telegram. The solicitor had not merely administered Margaret Bell's will. His firm had been one of room 12's 6 custodians. Clara was still examining the emblem when Pembroke arrived from Shrewsbury. The solicitor removed his spectacles, wiped rain from them, and asked where she had obtained the tally. When Clara told him, he opened his case and withdrew a sealed packet bearing the same bell and linked circles. My father left this in the firm's strong room, he said. It could be opened only by the owner of the Bellwether presenting the 6th tally. You knew about room 12. I knew there was a trust. I did not know the room existed. Clara placed the tally upon the seal. Its 6 notches matched 6 raised marks around the bell. The deeply filed notch aligned with a narrow channel that released the packet's clasp without breaking the wax. Inside lay a duplicate deed, dated July 1846, 6 signed statements, and a linen-backed map of Merrodin's watercourses. The Bellweather Workers' Trust had been founded after a winter coach overturned near the village, killing 2 drivers and leaving 4 employees permanently injured. The coaching company paid nothing to their families. 6 women connected to inns along the route. 3 proprietors, 2 widows, and a bookkeeper combined their savings to purchase Bell Meadow and the spring beneath it. When the railway arrived, the trust leased water from that spring to the railway company for its engines. Half the income supported injured transport workers and their dependents. The remainder maintained the conduit, roadside pumps, and 6 emergency rooms where stranded travelers could receive shelter without charge. Room 12 was never a bedroom, Clara said. It was an accounting name. Pembroke nodded. A way to keep charitable obligations separate from an inn's ordinary debts. The trust required 6 custodians, each holding a tally and 1 portion of its records. No single steward could sell the spring, alter the beneficiaries, or withdraw the reserve. The Bellwether's owner held the 6th custodianship and kept the central accounts. Clara spread Margaret's older ledgers beside the deed. The figures aligned. £2 10 had been allocated quarterly to each of 6 surviving beneficiaries. The unexplained BW maintenance account contained the railway lease income. But payments had stopped reaching 4 families 3 years earlier. In Hartwell's accounts, Clara had seen matching sums enter a drainage fund controlled by Vane. He had disguised trust income as estate revenue, then accused her of stealing from the very account he used to conceal it. The missing £146 was never missing, she said. He moved it into temporary holdings, reversed some entries, and left my initials beside the transfers. He needed my daybook destroyed before anyone compared dates. Pembroke examined her reconstructed totals. Can you prove the trust income entered Hartwell? The railway can. It issued the payments. The linen-backed map supplied the material reason for Pritchard's interest. Bell Meadows Spring passed beneath the lower road and fed both the railway tanks and 3 public pumps. The Bellweather deed included permanent access to the main valve through the inn's stable yard. Pritchard had not purchased the mortgage merely to eliminate competition. Possession of the inn would allow him to obstruct that access and pressure the trust into selling the water rights. The Crown's proposed bottling shed, recently approved by his own rating committee, appeared on Pembroke's copy of the parish development notice. The drainage neglect was no accident. Repeated flooding made the Bellweather appear worthless, while increasing pressure to sell. Clara then showed Pembroke her notes about the 5 missing dispatch boxes. His face tightened. 5 custodians died without clear successors, he said. Vane became executor or estate advisor in 3 cases. Pritchard purchased the debts of another. Together, they reconstructed the sequence. Vane had discovered the trust while settling an estate. He removed its scattered records, redirected the railway payments, and used Pritchard to acquire the Bellweather. Margaret recognized the false accounting, but lacked the evidence held at Hartwell. She left the inn to the one person trained to follow altered figures back to their source. Among the signed statements was a letter from the trust's first bookkeeper, Eliza Bell, Margaret's mother. She had written that no family should lose bread merely because respectable men found suffering inconvenient to record. Clara understood then why Margaret had said she would know what ought to be counted. Not rooms, not coins, people whom an account could either preserve or erase. The legacy was not a fortune she could spend. It was a productive spring, a body of engineering records, accumulated reserves owed to injured workers, and a legal duty attached to the Bellweather itself. Pembroke estimated that 7 years of undistributed lease income remained recoverable. Enough existed to repair the conduit, satisfy the lawful mortgage balance, stabilize the inn, and resume support payments. But only if they prevented Pritchard from taking possession and proved Vane's diversion publicly. "We have the duplicate deed," he said, "but Vane has your daybook and the stolen boxes." Clara looked toward the flooded yard, where the old overflow channel remained open. "He also has 5 sets of records that were never meant to be held by one man." She turned the deed to its final page. Each custodian's portion bore a different handwritten verification total. Separately, the figures meant nothing. Combined, they had to equal the trust's annual railway income exactly. "If Vane presents those boxes to claim authority," Clara said, "he proves he broke the trust. If he conceals them, the railway accounts prove where the money went." So the first time since leaving Hartwell, the road into the books and the road out were both visible. By Monday morning, Pembroke had obtained certified copies of the railway company's payment vouchers. Clara spent the night arranging every available figure into 3 columns. Money issued by the railway, money acknowledged by the trust, and money entered at Hartwell. The county hearing drew more spectators than the courtroom could seat. News of hidden rooms and stolen charities had traveled through Meriden faster than the accusation against Clara. Vane arrived wearing mourning gray and an expression of reluctant duty. Pritchard sat behind him with Edwin Shaw. At their feet rested 5 tin dispatch boxes. Their confidence depended upon Clara appearing alone and frightened. Instead, Pembroke stood beside her. Ruth, Silas, Mary Hobb, and Daniel waited among the witnesses. A railway accountant occupied the front bench with a locked document case. Vane presented Hartwell's ledgers first. 3 summaries bore Clara's initials, beside transfers totaling £146. He described her as clever, secretive, and uniquely capable of disguising a theft. So Clara did not deny making the initials. "I initialed those lines when they contained tenant drainage expenses," she said. "The amounts were altered afterward." "You possess no original record supporting that claim," Vane replied. "No. It was stolen from the Bellweather 3 nights ago." A murmur passed through the room. Vane then introduced the 5 dispatch boxes. He claimed they had been discovered among obsolete Hartwell papers and contained evidence that the railway payments were reimbursements owed to the estate. That was his error. Pembroke produced the 1846 deed. The magistrates compared its seal with Clara's tally and the emblems on the boxes. Vane protested that an old charitable agreement had no bearing upon missing estate funds. "It determines whose money entered your accounts," Clara said. The railway accountant opened his case. Each quarterly voucher identified the recipient as Bellweather Workers' Trust, through Hartwell Collecting Steward. The totals matched the maintenance entries in Margaret's ledgers, not the drainage expenditures Vane had described. Clara asked that the contents of the 5 boxes be arranged by year. Each contained partial beneficiary lists and a handwritten verification figure. Vane had assumed that dividing the records destroyed their meaning. Clara added the 5 totals, then included the 6th figure preserved in Margaret's surviving half-sheet. The sum equaled the railway's annual lease payment exactly. She repeated the calculation for 3 separate years. The trust divided its records, so no steward could alter the accounts without obtaining all 6 portions. Clara explained. "Mr. Vane has brought 5 portions into court, while claiming they were ordinary estate papers. His possession is evidence of the breach." Vane's composure faltered. He argued that Margaret had voluntarily surrendered the boxes. Silas testified that she had continued searching for room 12 until shortly before her death. Mary described the quarterly meetings and the Hartwell carriage. Ruth produced her sketch of the boot impressions left in the chamber. Then Daniel stepped forward. The boy admitted that Pritchard had paid him to listen beneath the signboard. He also testified that Shaw had questioned him about the tin box and hidden entrance before the burglary. Shaw denied entering the Bellweather at night. Silas placed the recovered brass button on the clerk's table. Its green thread matched the missing button on Shaw's coat. More importantly, the button carried a maker's stamp from a Shrewsbury tailor. Pembroke had obtained the tailor's order book, which recorded only one recent set of coats made with that pattern of button. They belonged to Edwin Shaw. Pritchard rose and declared the evidence irrelevant to his mortgage. Clara answered by producing Margaret's maintenance accounts and the linen-backed water map. "You assumed responsibility for clearing the culvert 4 years ago," she said. "You collected the parish rate and performed no work. Then you acquired the mortgage after allowing repeated floods to damage the property securing it. I did not cause the storm. No, you arranged for ordinary rain to become profitable." Mary Hobb and 2 neighbors testified that Clara had sacrificed her own stable to prevent their cottages from flooding. The hearing ceased to be a spectacle about a disgraced bookkeeper. It became an accounting of who had profited from the village's losses. The magistrates dismissed Vane's complaint for lack of credible evidence and ordered the Hartwell ledgers, 5 dispatch boxes, and railway vouchers secured pending investigation. Vane and Shaw were detained for questioning concerning fraudulent entries and the Bellweather burglary. Pritchard was not detained, but Pembroke obtained an interim order preventing him from taking possession, selling the inn's contents, or interfering with the spring conduit until the mortgage and drainage accounts were examined. Outside the courthouse, Pritchard passed Clara without speaking. His public mask had not cracked dramatically. It had simply become useless. Men who had once accepted his figures without question were now asking to see receipts. When Clara returned to Meroden, the auction notice still hung from the coaching arch. Daniel climbed onto an overturned bucket and pulled it down. This time, no one stopped him. The villagers did not cheer. Their change was quieter and more credible. A mason offered to inspect the stable wall. The grocer reopened Clara's account with a written limit. 2 railway workers asked when the roadside pump would function again. Clara unlocked the Bellweather and found Ruth waiting in the restored taproom. For the first time, the room held more people willing to help than objects worth selling. The work of restoring the Bellweather began with estimates, not celebrations. Clara refused every promise that lacked a price, a date, and a responsible name. The mason confirmed that the surviving stable wall could be saved, though rebuilding the eastern side would take until spring. Silas designed permanent roof braces from seasoned oak. Ruth prepared the measurements and, for the first time, signed the drawings beneath her own name. The trust's legal recovery moved more slowly. Edwin Shaw confessed, after investigators found Clara's trunk, private daybook, and the stolen dispatch box concealed in a locked cellar at the Crown. He admitted entering room 12 twice, first after Margaret's death to remove records, and again after the flood under Pritchard's instructions. Vane had used his position at Hartwell to redirect railway payments for nearly 7 years. Some money financed failing estate investments. The rest had passed through accounts controlled by Pritchard. The altered drainage summaries were intended to conceal the transfers. When Vane learned that Margaret had left the Bellweather to Clara, he framed her before she could compare the 2 sets of books. Vane and Shaw were committed for trial. Vane was later convicted of fraud and falsifying accounts. Shaw received a lesser sentence after returning the stolen records and testifying to the conspiracy. Pritchard avoided imprisonment because no witness could prove that he had ordered the burglary in explicit words. He did not escape consequence. A civil judgment required him to repay the parish drainage funds, surrender the fraudulent inspection charges, and compensate the trust for damage caused by years of neglected maintenance. He resigned from the rating committee before its members could remove him. The crown remained his, but the deference he had mistaken for loyalty disappeared. Hartwell's trustees published a formal retraction of the accusation against Clara. They returned her withheld wages and offered her former position under a new steward. She declined. By December, the lawful balance on the Bellweather mortgage had been calculated. It was considerably smaller than Pritchard's demand. The recovered trust reserve paid the debt in full, but Clara entered the transaction carefully. The trust purchased the mortgage and discharged it in return for permanent access to the spring conduit. The inn itself remained hers. Finding the missing beneficiaries required months of parish searches, railway employment records, and letters sent across 3 counties. 2 had died, but their dependents were located. One elderly coachman had been living in a workhouse after losing a leg. Another beneficiary's daughter supported 3 children by taking in laundry. The first restored payments included every unpaid quarter, with interest drawn from the recovered reserve. Clara then reorganized the trust so its records could never again disappear into 6 private boxes. The 6 custodians retained separate verification totals, but complete copies were deposited with 2 solicitors and the railway company. Annual accounts would be read publicly in the Bellweather taproom. The spring conduit was cleared before the first hard frost. 3 village pumps returned to service, and the trust employed local laborers to maintain the drainage channels. Mary Hobb supervised a fund providing meals and temporary lodging to injured railway workers and stranded travelers. No sudden fortune repaired the Bellweather. Clara used her returned wages to secure the roof and reopen 4 bedrooms. Income from those rooms paid for the next 2. Railway inspectors became regular guests, followed by commercial travelers who preferred honest prices to the Crown's elaborate dining room. Clara earned additional money, keeping accounts for village tradespeople. She charged modest fixed fees and never accepted a client who refused to show every book. Ruth established a joinery workshop in the repaired stable. Silas objected to the painted sign bearing his daughter's name, then built its frame himself. He never apologized for doubting her ability, but he began directing customers to her without qualification. For Ruth, that was worth more than an apology spoken for appearance sake. By the following summer, the Bellwether's walls had been repointed, its gutters replaced, and its eastern meadow drained. One ruined wing remained closed, because Clara would not borrow merely to make the property appear complete. Restoration proceeded room by room, paid for by work already done. Room 12 became the trust office and archive. Its hidden door remained, but the mechanism beneath the 12th floorboard was repaired. Clara placed Margaret's account books beside the recovered dispatch boxes and framed Eliza Bell's founding statement above the desk. She added a smaller inscription beneath it. Value omitted from an account does not cease to exist. On the anniversary of Clara's arrival, the 6 custodians gathered to review the trust. Their totals balanced. Outside, children filled pitchers from the repaired roadside pump, while Ruth's saw sounded from the stable yard. Clara closed the new ledger and carried it into the tap room. Every table was occupied. Mary served supper near the hearth. Daniel, now earning proper wages as the inn's porter, opened the door for 2 rain-soaked travelers. Above them, the Bellwether's restored sign moved gently in the evening wind. Then the old bell beneath the eaves rang once. Its clear note passed through the coaching arch, across the drained meadow, and into a house that no longer had to lie about its size, or the worth of the woman who had learned to read what others erased.